My name is Mark Greene. For over a decade, I've been a senior editor at the Good Men Project. I'm an author and an activist on masculinity and parenting. And I have two books that are particularly relevant to this conversation. And one is titled The Little Me Too Book for Men, which is basically an exploration of our dominant culture of masculinity through the lens of the Me Too movement. And that is to say, men's reactivity around it and our inability to grasp sort of the major issues and how we got to where we are today. This problem of dominance-based masculinity plays out in the way that our children develop emotionally. In fact, for most boys, it cuts off the process, the trial and error process for them of learning to develop nuanced emotional expression, learning how to connect across difference, do all the things that we need to do. And instead, once we break that, sort of relational set of capacities in boys by shaming them out of things like emotional expression and authentic need for friendship and all that stuff gets sort of shamed out of boys, often via the denigration of the feminine, right? So what are you, a sissy? What are you, a girl? We train all that out of boys, and then we slot them into this hierarchical domination-based expression of masculinity, where if you want to be validated in terms of your masculinity, you dominate those around you. So that's the challenge, right? And the solution statement is the relational book for parenting. And through the process of parenting them to begin to see, center, and care for relationships, we can ensure that they don't get caught up in that cultural narrative that boys are essentially here to dominate and be stoic and be disconnected and all that stuff. So these are the two pieces of the puzzle for us. It's the problem statement in the Little Me Too book and the solution statement in the relational book for parenting. I first began writing as a parenting blogger, and then my articles were picked up there, and then I began to write there both about parenting but also about anybody who's raising a son, which I was beginning in 2005. Sooner or later starts to ask bigger questions, not just about parenting but also about what the larger culture is going to be teaching my son, and not coincidentally what the larger culture thought of me showing up at the park with my kid at noon on a Wednesday, because I was a stay-at-home dad for him as well.
Right. So tell me, how did the park react to you showing up at Wednesday at noon?
Oh, they just couldn't get enough of me. They really couldn't. There was all the moms were over there, and I'm over here on the bench, and I kept saying, "Hey Gus, how's it going? Having a good time?" Because I was trying to convince them that I actually had a child at the park and
you're not just
hanging out at the kids' park, even more alarming way. So that process, it was very clear to us in the stay-at-home dads movement, which a lot of us began blogging about, that the general, cultural opinion about dads was that they weren't really capable of doing, significant daily childcare, being a primary caregiver to their kids. And there were all these TV ads where, dads would be dropping their kids on their heads and messing up food and doing all this stuff because that was funny and that sold refrigerators or whatever they thought at the time. So we began to mount these public writing campaigns, asking these organizations to stop portraying, dads in this way. And over time, I think the whole narrative really shifted around that, not only in terms of the 2 million or so stay-at-home dads that were active at that time and still are, but also in terms of other men's general, the sort of granting of permission to other men to begin thinking of themselves as not only providers but also caregivers. We know from the COVID pandemic that one of the things that's come out of it is that a lot of men are saying, I'm not going back to the office and be, yanked out of my children's lives for 10 hours a day. I want something different. I want more flexibility. I want more access. I want to be part of my children and my partner's lives.
So this actually is a great place I want to start to get more personal with you. So did your understanding of your own masculine identity and doing that kind of excavation work happen congruently? Like, did you start to look at these issues as a stay-at-home dad, or had you done the work before you became a stay-at-home dad? I'm just curious your own relationship to this work and how
Yeah.
it's developed over this time of you being involved in the space.
Yeah. It's not so much the stay-at-home dad piece. For me, it was, but it was really just the birth of my son. And I just want to make the distinction that there are many dads who are, while not stay-at-home dads, they are engaged enough for this same experience to have happened for them or be happening for them.
Yeah.
And the experience was pretty straightforward for me. I began to understand what it means to be in service to someone else. Not as, here's the check, put it in the bank, get my dinner. I mean, literally to be every waking hour that my child was in the house doing what he was doing. I had a choice. I could choose to focus on the work that I was doing because I was still earning a living, or I could turn my attention to what he needed or wanted. And but the last person in line was me, what I needed. So I had clients, and then I had my son. And when a child is born, you know, I didn't have this experience where that, you know, I held my infant son and my life changed. That was not it. In fact, what I had was a panic attack.
You were like, what the fuck?
I thought, oh, what the hell? I got to finish hanging the screen door on the back there because that's part of my dad thing. And then there's some painting, and can I just go back to doing these tasks, because that's really how I define my participation in this process here, because this human being right here, I have no clue what to do. And after maybe, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, my wife, who had been the primary caregiver for our son, said, I got to get out of the house. Here, you take him. I'm going to go out for a while. And I remember distinctly sitting on the couch, holding him and being with him, and the clock just stopping. And I thought, every minute feels like an eternity. I don't know what to do. And he's looking at me like, hi. And I'm like, I don't know how to spend time in this way. I don't know how to be, all I'm thinking is the things that I feel like I should be doing or need to be doing or whatever. And here's a human being like seeking, you know, whatever that little human being needs minute to minute. And in that process, one of two things happen for a parent, man, woman, anybody, non-gender, binary. You either decide to recommit to your stuff that you're going to do and you're going to get done, and you fit the kid in, or you begin to change, you begin to shift. And whatever took place for me over the course of months. But I remember distinctly about a year later, and I've written about this in the Remaking Manhood book. I remember walking through the house in the evening. The sun was going down. I was able to walk a slow circle through the living room, kitchen, dining room, back around again. And I'm holding Gus, right? I've got him, and he's getting sleepy. And I'm singing You Are My Sunshine to him, and very softly under my voice. And I can hear the creak of the wood floors as I go around. And I changed one of the sentences in the song to, you'll always know, dear, how much I love you. And I'm singing to him, and he is falling asleep. And I, for probably the first time in half a decade, 20, 30, I don't know how many years, I feel at peace, and I feel like I'm where I belong. And this is after, weeks and weeks and months of changing diapers and to fixing food and doing all the amount of labor it takes to take care of a small child. Most women know, and most men don't. And until you get to that place where I was just going to make a something else, and really understand that
you're like,
that
can I go to the bathroom? Oh no, I can't.
Yeah, no. Well, and nap when they nap, because when they're done napping, you're not going to get that, so I literally got to the point where I was like, he's asleep, I'm asleep, and I was an older dad. My son was born when I was 45. So my partner and my wife also was very much involved, but we eventually, our marriage did not continue, and we got divorced when my son was 4, at which point I really was his full-time dad, because he was going to a school in the city here in New York. And so I'd get up every morning and I'd fix his lunch and I'd walk him to school and I'd help him, do all that stuff. My point is that the degree to which it changed me because I finally understood what it means to be in service to someone else. And I think people who do care for their elders, maybe hospice care, maybe end of life care, get a sense of this as well. But for a child, the beauty of it is that they're getting stronger and more independent and more vibrant and all those things. So it comes with this beautiful lifting motion, right, into their individuality. But what I also got out of it was he taught me how to get down on the floor and play and do little trucks and Hot Wheels. And we're building track around the house, and I'm out in the backyard in the sandbox and I'm making stuff. And my clients are like, is that going to be ready today? And I'm like, you betcha, midnight. And, all the stuff that's going on. But it's a beautiful,
hold on. I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry. So when you're on the floor, when you're packing lunch, when you're realizing what it's like to be in service, how does that redefine your sense of self and masculinity for you? Because I know the work you do and I know the messaging you do. I'm just wondering what happened to you. What was the dialogue in your head? What happened?
It fundamentally changes your perception of what is valuable about you. Aspects of myself that I never knew existed began to come into play in ways that were incredibly resourceful and consistent and reliable and trustworthy and worthy of love. And these are not things that I had always been transactional before that, right?
Okay.
Like, well, let's go out on a date and I'll buy dinner and then we'll have a relationship and then maybe later we'll get married and I'll pay the mortgage but you got to give me what I need too.
Totally.
That was the sort of transactional mindset that's out the window, because there is no transaction with children. Children are.
But to me, that's a human way of relating. Right? Like there are women.
The transactional or
meaning like across the board, people can be transactional, right? Like they could be like, I'm going to give you this, you give me that. But I'm talking about masculinity here for you.
Right. Masculinity is inherently transactional. The way we have constructed masculinity. The culture of masculinity in America is transactional. It's about power.
About that.
It's about hierarchy. It's about who gets to tell who else what's going on and what, and so there's this whole idea that men exist in a hierarchy of dominance. So at the very top of this hierarchy would arguably be white men like myself, and then everybody else falls below that. But even in that population of white males, you have a constant checking of status. Who's got the better job, who makes more money, who's in control, who's the boss, who's everything. And we all align ourselves in that hierarchy. And if you fail to perform in ways that are it's sort of acceptable in that limited, narrow performance of what a real man is, then you get policed back into the box, or you risk losing status or whatever goes on there. So we are constantly looking at our performance of masculinity from the standpoint of, will it be approved by the other men in our cohort, at our job, in our community, whatever it is. And then we are also seeking some kind of transactional profit from our actions all the time, because that's how we gain status in that hierarchy. Okay. So I go to work because I get the paycheck, because then I bring the paycheck home, then I'm able to leverage that economically with my family. It's all very much, I'm doing my part, now you do yours. I don't want to hear about your part. That the gender binary, the breaking down of roles, all that stuff, men learn to track in terms of, what am I going to get out of this? And can I get the things I want if I do this? But when you're a caregiver to a child, you come to understand very quickly that that's not a transactional relationship, but something far more beautiful emerges out of it, something more remarkable. And that is that I'm no longer, determining my value based on what I can produce and consume. I'm determining my value in this much more intimate human way of being in love with another human being. And it's not sexual, it's
No,
platonic,
totally.
it's
Just that
beautiful.
energy, right?
It's suddenly you light up when you see that person and they light up when they see you. And you're walking down the street with this little hand in yours, and life has a sense of balance and purpose and beauty. My son is 16 now. I still remember carrying him in the crook of my arm, and the way he would put his little forearm on the back of my neck and just hang it up there. And he just would ride there. And it was totally natural for him. He felt safe and trusted. And I thought, wow, I have this human relationship that's going on every day. And it got to the point where getting up was like, it's Christmas, let's do some more of this, but it only happens if you really open yourself up to that process as a parent. And in the case of men, if we are lucky enough to be charmed into that, or to have the good fortune to have to do it, or whatever the case may be, it opens our hearts up in ways that break the sort of man box culture, dominance, masculinity, control, command. That whole version of masculinity cannot survive under the onslaught of love that emerges from that.
Did you have that sense? Was it conscious like that? Oh, now I'm not transactional and I'm this? Or did the experience inform that philosophy?
Well, it's like the first 6 months, you're just trying to get through the day, right?
No, I
Just
understand. I had 2 boys.
And so I wasn't like, oh, look, I'm emerging, I'm a butterfly. I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. Why did we ever decide to machine wash diapers? What were we thinking? And you're doing whatever you have to do to get through the day.
Yeah.
What's fascinating, though, is also, your child is emerging and becoming, verbal, and we did sign language with him, and all these things are happening, and you start to see these recognition moments in a child's eyes when they're a year old, year and a half, 2 years, 2.5. And I remember to this day thinking, he's 2 now, and this is going to go on for a year. How cool is that? And I have moments like that throughout my memory of him, where I thought, oh, 4, we're going to be able to do this stuff now. We used to lay giant pieces of paper out on the floor and get colored tempera paints and paint giant abstract paintings. And he would just be like, yes, and start making stuff. And then when he got a little older, we would lay big pieces of paper out and draw entire airplanes with seats and build a little rudder thing. And we would sit in it and like, okay, we're flying. Things like that. You don't get in our more mature, sort of disconnected, hierarchical masculine culture. We're not allowed that. We're not allowed to be childlike. We're not allowed to play. We're not allowed to find all the joy of connection. And in that regard, that's what I found and discovered. Well, the relational book for parenting is centers around this idea of relational practices, which is born out of, not only out of this, but born out of the couple and family therapy work, which came out of social work, right? So it's a part of psychology. There's psychology, which is very individualizing and Freudian and whatever. And then social workers out of that population, which naturally, of course, they're always thinking about these larger social networks. Out of that work came couple and family therapy, which said, if you've got issues or concerns, instead of talking about, you or what's going on inside of you, tell me about your family of origin. Tell me about the relationships you're embedded in right now. And for us, the idea of raising a child, we said very early on, and I know this sounds kind of stark, but the thing that we said was, we want to make sure we don't break his spirit by being so focused on teaching and telling and doing and deadlines and homework and success and all this stuff. So instead, relational practices focus on this idea that we that when we're in relationship with someone, we are literally creating a third space, which is a relational space. And in that space, the choices we make and how we go back and forth define the relationship. So we are co-creating emotions, interactions, stories, narrative, frames, ideas, context, all that stuff's being co-created moment by moment in the back and forth of conversation, of relating. And this is happening with an infant, just like it happens with an adult. And if we view that relationship as what we're centering, not our role as parents or their role as children, or our need to teach and tell versus their need to learn and listen, but instead we say, what are we co-creating? Then we begin to admit something which is fundamentally true in any relationship, which is that as I am shaping you, you are shaping me. We are creating who we're becoming next, moment by moment. So we have a set of capacities in the book, relational capacities, where we invite parents to set aside teaching and telling. We have to do some of that work, and we know that's important, right? And instead also learn to create a space where our kid is invited to show up as their whole selves and to contribute to this process of creating the relationship, to bring their ideas and their thoughts and their points of view. And some of the capacities we have a thing called, I actually have a spinner wheel.
I love it. Show me. Okay.
Pick one. These are all relational practices on the wheel that are from the book.
Can you put it up close to the screen?
Yeah, I'll do it. Let's see if it'll be up there.
So stay playful, listen with curiosity, reframe our stories, consider context, ask questions, hold uncertainty. So tell me how the wheel works. What do you do?
Okay. So each one of these capacities are equal, that you can pick any one you want to work with. Stay playful is sort of an overarching frame, but the idea of stay playful is in any moment or interaction, I can choose to hold my ideas more lightly, to see what's going to emerge, and to be open to possibilities that I'm not bringing with me as part of my agenda, right? And in the moment that we sort of decide to be playful, we can do something called listen with curiosity. And I'll just explain that real quickly. And this works with children, it works with parents, it works with long-term partners, it works with people you work at your workplace. But the idea is that many times when we enter into a conversation, we tend to say, well, I've known Frank for 15 years at the office, and I kind of know how Frank's going to respond to this, but we're going to have this conversation about this project, and no, and you go in with these expectations. Same thing with your partner, right? We're going to have a conversation about the budget, but I know how Margie feels about money, and I sort of know how the conversation is going to. This is something that we do, and it's based on stories that we've made up over time in being in relationship with this person that we use to sort of define what our expectations are. So listen with curiosity is to instead say, I expect to be surprised by something in this conversation. I expect to hear something I haven't heard before, and I expect something new to come out of it. And so you enter into the same conversation with Margie about the household budget.
Or Frank.
Frank, don't even get me started on Frank. And so I enter in with my partner, Frank, and I say, Frank, we're having this conversation. And every conversation has, multiple threads, right? And Frank will say something over here, and that's the thread that I expected, right? I always expect to hear that one. And Frank says, no. And I say, okay. But then Frank says a few other things, and maybe they're smaller, little mentions. Frank may say, I had this other idea. It's kind of crazy, but well, never mind that idea. So when I'm listening with curiosity, I'm going to say, okay, I confirm that one that I expected, but wait a minute, Frank, let's go back over to this other little thread, this little new green idea. What was that? Tell me about that. And your focus is to look for new emergent ideas. And in that way, you suddenly go, well, I'll be darned, Frank's not actually thinking the way I expected him to. That's one revelation that comes out of listening with curiosity. But the other one is that we have many more emergent possibilities about how to go forward. And in this way, we free ourselves from the sort of predictive outcomes that really get so repetitive and so habit forming and so deadening in our relationships. And so I try to bring that kind of energy to any conversation I'm in anywhere now. I'm not listening for what I expect. I'm listening for what I don't expect. And that's just one of the relational capacities. Another one here that I really like is reframing our stories.
Yeah.
And that's also really important because these stories that are helping us, that are making us predict conversations and predict outcomes. We also have these stories about ourselves. You know, I'm not very good with kids. That might have been my story when Gus was born. But when you start to say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to let that story define me. Instead, I'm going to make a new story that I'm learning how to be good with kids. And then I'm going to lean into that story some. And in the process of reframing our stories, we begin to link to the other capacities on the wheel. We start to listen differently. We start to think about the context of that other person. We start to hold our ideas more lightly. All these things sort of blend together to create this emergent, exciting new set of observations. And this is all based on a simple fact. Nobody is the same. Nobody stays who they are. People get married, and 10 years later, they're looking back at that person they married, and they say, well, I married that person. That's who I married, and I expect them to stay that way. And there it is. Or you can say, let's stay in dialogue. Let's keep talking. Let's keep being surprised, and let's walk together down this road of change. Because I assure you, if you're looking at the spot where they were, they're not there anymore.
Right.
None of us
are. You're not paying attention. You're not listening. You're not seeing.
And you're going on all the stories that you've already written about that person, and you're assuming in the conversations, and everything has that dead down. Meanwhile, they've walked down the road and over the hill, and they're gone. And sometimes they turn around a little bit later and they go, I don't feel like I know you anymore. I don't think this marriage is working. I think we need to call it a day. So there are beautiful things that can come out of the relational book for parenting, but there's a lot of games in there. There's a lot of ideas. I've written fables in there that talk about things like context in humorous ways. There's cartoons all through it. But the book is basically designed to get us to break out of the habit of relying on roles and tasks, and instead shift to this focus on relationships. And in that process, we're teaching our children how to be in relationship. And if we can create these expansive containers where everybody gets to bring who they authentically are, gets to ask each other questions, gets to engage every day. In my experience, my son Gus, who's 16, is still daily in conversation with me.
What's so cool about you, what I really, really admire about you and the work you do, and why I'm so happy to be connected to you, is that you're really doing the work. There are a lot of people who can get up and be like, well, there's this, dominance culture, and, anyone can kind of give the monologue you gave. I mean, maybe not as articulately, because you're incredibly articulate, but there aren't that many people who actually check themselves or actually engage in a different dynamic and see themselves anew. And you do that. And so this kind of segues into what I wanted you to write an article about, which is, I feel like your parenting style has really created or helped co-create a child who not only is in dialogue with you, but knows himself and is intrinsically motivated. And so I want to talk a little bit about this because, as I told you, I help kids with college essays. Across the board, the parents are, this is who you are, this is what you like, you're going into engineering, you're going to Brown, you're going to Cornell, why aren't you applying to Harvard? You need to apply to Harvard. And there's no sense of, does the kid want that? Is that even good for the kid? Like, what do they want? I have so many teenagers who cannot go to a website and look up a professor or a class that they would connect to. And so I just want to talk to you about your son, if you feel comfortable, obviously, because I feel like his ability to know himself and connect with others because you connected with him is such a shining example of what we want for all of our children, and especially what we want for our boys, so many of them who strip their humanity away and don't know themselves.
I never found Gus to be without intrinsic motivation because of that long history of playing and creating with him. We were constantly drawing and making and doing, and that sort of infectious joy of creating something new next was always part of and I think there's a metaphor there for creating relationship, right? The process of what is emerging and what we're doing in those moments. We had we had a game called the Catch You Something Doing Right, Catch You Doing Something Right game. And I still have the poster on my wall over here. It has Gus and Saliha and Mark, and we have a big pad of stickers. And whenever anybody catches somebody doing something right, we call it out, we make them guess what it was, and we give them a sticker. And after you get 10 stickers, you get, $5 or a foot rub or whatever is appropriate, for the person.
Yeah.
But when we first started this with Gus, he was I don't know, 6 or 7, and we were having arguments about schoolwork, or I don't know what, some stuff that had to happen, and I began to get the impression that all the time I was paying attention to what needed to get done or what wasn't getting done right. Towel on the floor in the bathroom, or these school books need to be put over here, or whatever that stuff was. And we decided instead just to switch gears and pay attention to what was being done right. So the way the game worked was, a little 6-year-old kid, and he's doing his stuff. And I would come in, and Saliha would be over at her desk, and I would point at Gus and I'd say, "Caught you." And he'd be like, "What? Caught me doing what?" I'd say, "Caught you doing something right." And he went, "Oh, okay. What was it?" And I'd say, "Well, you're gonna have to guess," and he'd say, "Oh, come on, give me a hint." And I'd say, "Okay, well, it's in the back part of the house." We'd go back, start looking around, Sally, I'd get up and come around behind, she'd be looking, and Gus would be, and I'd say, "Maybe it was in this room." And he would go into the bathroom and he'd be like, "Oh, I hung up my towel." And I'd say, "Absolutely, that's exactly right." And I'd take the sticker and I'd go and stick it on the thing, and we'd be like, "All right, good job," and we'd go back to what we're doing. And that game went on in a number of different ways over time. But I have to tell you, when a 6-year-old points at you across the room and says, caught you doing something right," and you're like doing the dishes or whatever, you're like, oh, what did I do? Something good? And he's like, "Oh yeah, it was good." I said, I did the dishes? He goes, "No, Dad." "What was it?" I said, "Well, Dad, a little earlier, you were talking to me and you were starting to get kind of annoyed. And then I saw you stop. I saw you change. You stopped that. You just made that choice, Dad. I saw it."
Wow.
And I was like, crap, and he's like, "So come on, let's get you a sticker." And it's a little kid, boop, up on the thing and back to playing with his toys. And for him to understand what he saw came out of all these different games we were playing, all these different conversations, all of these ideas, for him he knew what he saw, and to have the confidence to say it to me, that he saw that and that he thought, "Well, that was worth a sticker, Dad."
Yeah.
So just a whole different way of co-creating relationships, of caring for that relational space. And what has come out of it is, I think, a child who I can trust. I can trust my parenting with him as much as we can trust anything in this world.